What is going on, guys? It's Modded Warfare here. Welcome back to another episode of PS4 Jailbreak Tutorials, episode 13. In this episode, I'm going to be showing you guys how to get a Linux distro running on your jailbroken PS4 on 6.72 or lower, and probably 7.02 if we get a 7.02 jailbreak soon. So yeah, basically running Linux on your PS4 is one of the biggest things that you can do with a jailbroken PS4 that gives you so much more functionality. You can run a proper full-on Linux desktop operating system on your PS4 so that you can just use it as a normal desktop computer, or of course run games on it because it has hardware acceleration support, so you can run, you know, PC games and also a bunch of emulators as well. So it offers you a whole load of extra functionality. And just to get one of the rumors out of the way, some of the misconceptions, it doesn't replace the PS4's operating system with a Linux distro. You're not wiping the PS4 and making it a Linux box. You kind of have a dual boot functionality, so every time you turn the console on, it will boot you into the normal PS4 operating system. All your stuff will still be there, and then if you want to go onto Linux, you just run a payload and it will boot you into Linux. And then if you want to go back to the PS4's operating system again, you just restart the Linux distro and you'll be back in the PS4 operating system. So you don't have to worry about that. You'll still have your PS4 OS as well as Linux. So first of all, my PS4 is one of the models that really sucks when it comes to running Linux, and that is another issue with running Linux on the PS4, is that different models have different levels of success when running Linux. So because I've managed to get it working on my PS4, this method should work with all of you, but there is some trial and error involved. You may run into some issues. But hopefully with the methods that I explain in this video, you'll be able to get it booted on your PS4 no matter which model of PS4 you have. There is also an issue where the Wi-Fi drivers don't work on certain models as well, which again is my PS4 is one of those ones where the Wi-Fi drivers don't work. So, you know, you'll find that out when you actually boot into Linux, if the Wi-Fi is working or not. So that is another issue. And finally, there are a bunch of different distros that you can run on the PS4. There's Arch Linux, like psxitarch Linux. There's also obviously Fedora and Manjaro Linux and Gentoo. We're going to be running Gentoo Linux, even though it's not the most user-friendly Linux distro out there for beginners. It definitely seems to be the one that's the most stable and works the best that I've found, at least on my PS4. Plus, I've also done a bunch of other videos that show you how to get more out of Gentoo Linux as well, showing you how to get, you know, DirectX games running properly and CMU emulator installed as well. I've got a video on that so that you can get Wii U games running on your PS4. So I've got a bunch of other videos you can then go on to after this one, so that you can get even more out of your Linux distro on the PS4. So yeah, that is basically it. So finally, let's get into the requirements. So first of all, you're going to need a USB keyboard. Technically, if the Wi-Fi drivers work, you can use a Bluetooth keyboard and mouse once you're on the distro, but it's always a good idea to have a USB keyboard because sometimes if it doesn't boot properly, then you're going to need to enter commands in the shell, which requires a USB keyboard. Also, you're going to need a USB storage device to actually load Linux from. So technically, there is a way to get Linux booted from the internal hard drive of the PS4, but it only works on a small amount of PS4s, certain models. So in order to support everybody, every PS4, we're going to be using the external drive method, so booting Linux from an external drive, which will require a USB drive or an external hard drive, or preferably the best thing to use to get the best speed is use a SATA SSD that's connected to the PS4 with a SATA to USB 3.0 adapter, which you can buy online, obviously. I'll put pictures of all these things up on screen. And lastly, one other thing that I would recommend you get is a USB hub so that you have access to more USB ports on the PS4, so you can connect a mouse and a keyboard up at the same time. So, and those are dirt cheap to buy as well. So you can just get a cheap USB hub, get more USB ports from the PS4. I highly recommend that. So anyway, now that we've got all the requirements out of the way, let's get into actually getting this all set up. So before we actually mount the image to our external drive, one of the things you want to check is the partition style. It needs to be set to master boot record rather than GPT. So to check that, if you head into disk management by typing in disk in the start menu, you'll get disk mgmt.msc, or if you're on the Windows 10 start menu, type in disk man and it will come up with create and format hard disk partitions. So if you go in here, this gives you disk management. And in disk management, if you find your drive, you just want to right click on it and go to properties and make sure that under volumes, the partition style is set to master boot record. As you can see, I've changed mine to GPT, which is incorrect, just as an example on what to do if it is under something like GPT, GUID partition table. That's not what you want. It needs to be master boot record in order for it to work properly on the PS4. So to change it, if it's not under master boot record, the way you change it is you can right click on the disk and convert to MBR disk. If the option is grayed out like this, it's because it's currently formatted. So you can right click and delete all the volumes off your USB drive, which will wipe any data on it. So make sure it's backed up first. And then you can right click and convert to an MBR disk. And once you've done that, just right click and go to properties, go to volumes, and it should now be set correctly to master boot record. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to need to mount the image file to our USB drive or external hard drive, whatever device you're going to boot Linux from. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to run the Etcher program, which I'll link in the description. Works on Windows and Mac OS. And also you're going to want the Gentoo image file and the PS4 kernel.zip. Again, all the download links will be in the description. So what we're going to do is we're going to select image. So you're just going to select the Gentoo image that I have on the desktop. Select the target, which is going to be the drive that we're going to obviously mount the image to, which in my case is an SSD that I'm connecting to my computer with a SATA to USB 3.0 adapter. And then I'm going to flash it and click continue. And there we go. So we're now mounting the image to the drive. Okay, so once it's done, it should say flash complete, and you can then close out of Etcher. From here, we're going to eject the USB drive and plug it back in to the computer. The reason we're doing that is we want to see if it detects the partition on the USB drive. It has created two partitions on our storage device. One is a FAT32 partition that contains the kernel, and the other one is the actual main, operating system files for the distro. So the actual installation of Gentoo. So none of them are showing up on my computer right now. So if that happens, we're just going to run disk management. So on disk management, you can see the drive here. So there's our Gentoo installation, and here's our 200 megabyte FAT32 partition. We're just going to assign that a drive label so it shows up on the computer. So we're going to right click, go to change drive letter and paths, and then click add, and we're going to assign a drive letter to it. And there we go. So now it should show up here on my computer and we can access it. So okay, so here we have the actual kernel files here for Linux, and typically these ones don't work. The ones that come with Gentoo, they don't tend to work on 6.72 on most PS4s. Definitely doesn't work on mine. So, you can try it if you want, give it a few tries. At least try it about 5 times, I would say, because sometimes you do just generally get crashes when trying to load Linux anyway, even if the files work. So it takes a few tries. So you should probably at least try 5 times with each one. Until you find the one that works for you. So you can find more here on this post, working Linux kernels for PS4 Pros. Even though it says for PS4 Pros, some of these work on standard PS4s as well. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's a few different ones you can try. There's this one here, PS4 Sources 5.3.7. So if you try that one is this one here. So if you try this one, if we open this up, you can see you've got 2 files here, the same 2 files. So you just replace the ones that are already in there with these 2 files. Simple as that, because these ones are designed for Gentoo anyway. So you just copy them over and you should be good to go. You've also got this one here for Gentoo, kernel 5.3.7 Gentoo, this one right here. So you can also try that one. If I download that one as well, got it right here. So this one again, this one's just the BZ image, so you don't replace the interim FS file that already comes with Gentoo, that's already in there. You just replace the BZ image file right here with this one, and then you can give that one a try. Now, if that one doesn't work, the one that actually works for me, surprisingly, the only one that works for me is this one. This is actually an even more up-to-date kernel, I believe. This is 5.3.18. It's for the IT Mania. It's mainly for the for the Jaro Linux, the Manjaro distribution, but it does work for me with Gentoo as well. So if I download this one, and this one also is just a BZ image file, so I can just copy that one in. However, it doesn't work with the normal interim FS because this one is designed for Manjaro Linux, and it uses the psxitarch Linux install scripts and stuff. It basically uses the psxitarch interim FS file. So what I have done, if you download the PS4 kernel one that I have linked in the description, this one here that says psxitarch loader edited to load Gentoo instead. This is basically the normal psxitarch interim FS. I've just replaced the label to Gentoo, which basically just means it will boot you into Gentoo Linux instead of trying to boot into psxitarch. I'm going to copy that interim FS file in there. So yeah, basically, if you're going to be trying to use this one here, this IT Mania one, you just need to make sure you use the interim FS file, the one that I've put in the description, the one that's the psxitarch one that's edited to load Gentoo instead. Just use that one. There's also some other ones in here that you can try. If the worst comes to the worst and none of the 5.3.1s work, so 5.3.7, 5.3.18, if none of those ones work, worst case scenario, you can go back down and try one of these older 4.14 versions, which will present some more problems with Linux. But, you know, if it works, then it's better than nothing. So you can try these older BZ images for 4.14 right here. So as you can see, there's a lot of ones that you can try, a lot of trial and error. But what works best for me is this IT Mania BZ image 5.3.18 and the interim FS for psxitarch, which I've edited to load Gentoo instead. That seems to work the best for me. So that's the files I'm going to keep on there, and eject the drive and plug it into the PS4. I'm sorry I can't just give you one solution that will work perfectly for everyone. Like I say, all PS4s are different, and you know, some have better success with different versions than others do. So, you know, it's very much a trial and error thing, unfortunately. Okay, so once you're on the PS4, before you try and boot into Linux, there's a few settings we need to change. So if we head into the settings menu, go down to sound and screen, and change the video output settings. Make sure the resolution is set to 1080p, especially if you're on a PS4 Pro. You don't want it to be set to 4K. You want to make sure it's set to 1080p. HDR, make sure that's turned off. And then finally, if we exit out into the system settings, we go to system, make sure enable HDCP is turned off. You want to make sure that is disabled. Those three settings can cause the screen to go black when trying to boot into Linux and it doesn't recover, or it goes to no signal and it doesn't recover. So if you turn all of those settings off, if you turn HDCP off, HDR off, and set the resolution to 1080p, then you shouldn't run into any of those issues. So now we're going to go onto the internet browser. Now the best way that I've found that this works the majority of the time is to actually run the hen payload first and then run the Linux loader. So I've tried just loading the Linux loader first off, and it tends to crash a lot more often. So preferably go onto the Lethals exploit host, which you can go to right here. You can see the address lethal.github.io/672v8. So if you go to that address, it should take you here, and then we're going to run the exploit plus hen right at the top. And hopefully it doesn't give you a message saying it failed. If it does, you have to reboot and try again. So as you can see, it was successful right there. Welcome to PS4 hen. So once it comes up with that, you can press circle to exit the browser, then go back onto the browser again, and now go onto Al-Aziv's exploit host, which again, you can see the address is right here, or you can go to the IP address 165.227.83.145. And then from there, we're going to go to PS4 Linux. Now you can try both of these two options here, this 6.72 Linux payload and this 6.72 Linux payload. One of the main differences between these two payloads is the amount of VRAM it allocates to the GPU when running Linux, because there's 8 gigabytes of RAM in the PS4, and so it allocates a certain amount of that memory as video memory for the GPU, and the rest is obviously system memory for the CPU. So, you know, if you run this payload right here, I'm pretty sure it allocates 6 gigabytes of RAM to the CPU and 2 gigabytes as VRAM for the GPU. Whereas if you run this one, it allocates, I think, 7 gigabytes to the CPU and only 1 gigabyte of VRAM for the GPU. So depending on which one you prefer, run whichever payload. And if one isn't working for you, just use the other one and you should get booted into Linux with at least one of those payloads should work for you. It's also often happens where you run the payload and it will just crash the system, or it will switch off your PS4, it will go to a black screen and then the PS4 will just turn off. Sometimes it can take 4 or 5, 6 or 7 attempts running the payload to get it working. Again, it just depends on your PS4 and how compatible your PS4 is with Linux, and how your PS4 handles the exploit as well for 6.72. So unfortunately, that can be the case sometimes. We're going to run this payload. Make sure you don't have any other USB devices plugged in to your PS4 right now, just the device that's actually loading Linux from, your external drive or USB drive or whatever you're loading Linux from. That should be the only thing plugged in to any of the USB ports, because sometimes if you have the keyboard or mouse plugged in or a USB hub or something plugged in before you load the payload, then you can run into issues where the payload doesn't work. It's weird, but it happens. So I find I get better success if I don't have anything else plugged in. And then once you're actually booted into Linux, once it's all working, then you can plug in your keyboard and mouse or USB hub, so that you can, use your keyboard and mouse on Linux. Okay, so what should happen is the, console should lose signal for a few seconds and then it should regain the signal. And as you can see, it should now boot into Gentoo Linux. There you go. Because I edited that file to change the label to Gentoo, it boots straight into Gentoo. Now, if I hadn't done that, then it would say that it was missing label PSX. It could not find label psxitarch Linux. And then it would just not go any further and you'd have to manually mount the image yourself. It booted successfully and that booted pretty damn fast. And that is one of the advantages of mounting the image on the computer instead of having to run the install script once you're actually on the shell on the PS4. So we boot straight in. And obviously I am running off an SSD. So if mine boots a lot faster than yours, if you're seeing your boot times, your load up times are a bit slower, it's probably just because you're using a slower drive. Okay, so now we're actually booted into Gentoo. I just want to change the kind of taskbar here to make it to resemble more like Windows, I guess, because that's just what I'm used to. So I'm going to right click on the bar up here and unlock widgets. And then I'm going to right click and edit panel. And then I'm just going to go ahead and remove that panel. So remove panel here. Then right click and add a panel, default panel, which should bring it back. And then I'm going to right click on it and go to edit panel again. And then I'm going to take the screen edge and basically drag it down here to the bottom, just like that. So then we have kind of a start menu here in the bottom left, a bit more like Windows. So yeah, so first of all here, as you can see, if I go into the game section, there's a lot of stuff that's already pre-installed for you. You've got RetroArch, obviously a multi-system emulator. You've got things like the Dolphin emulator for running Wii and GameCube games. You've got Lutris, which is like a game launcher for Linux that can add better compatibility for running PC games. You've got, PS1 emulator, PS2, PSP emulator, Steam as well as built in, so you can play your PC games from Steam. A lot of stuff is already there built in for you. So for one of the things that you need to do first of all, though, is we need to run gparted, which is right here, as you can see. So if it's not showing up right here, you can just type in gparted and it should show up. And then it's going to ask for the root password, which is PS4 in lowercase characters. That is the password. So the reason we're opening this is, as you can see, the primary partition for Gentoo is only a 10 gigabyte partition. There's already 9.67 gigabytes being used, so there's very little space available. So what you want to do is extend that partition to use the rest of the space of the drive. So if we select the ext4 partition, the Gentoo partition, and then right click on it and select resize/move, and then drag this bar all the way up to the right, and then click resize, and then click the little tick to apply that change. And there we go. So that just extends that partition. So now the Gentoo partition is taking up the rest of the available space on my drive. So now I have plenty of space available now. So just make sure you do that. Otherwise you'll run into, you know, issues installing things because there's not going to be enough space for downloading stuff. So once we've done that, we have everything up and running now. There's also a little game controller icon down here that you can see, which is for like mapping your PS4 controller. As you can see, I don't have the Wi-Fi drivers working because my PS4 doesn't support the Wi-Fi drivers. They don't work on my model. But if yours are working, then you should have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, so you can connect to your Wi-Fi network and also connect the controller via Bluetooth or via USB, so you can play your games using the DualShock 4 controller. So the next things I'm going to show you are things that I would recommend you do setting things up. This is useful for people who are not very used to Linux. If you are used to Linux, if you're like a Linux guru, then you probably don't need to watch the rest of this video. If not, though, I would recommend continuing watching this because we do need to change a few things that I highly recommend. So firstly, we're going to open up the terminal. So if we type in terminal, we should get it showing up here. So we're going to run the terminal. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger. Zoom in a little bit here. So a few things we need to do in terminal. First of all, we're going to change the password of our account. So we're going to do PASSWD to change the password. And okay, so it requires current password, which is PS4, and then new password. So entering the new password, that updates the password for the PS4 account, which is the account that you're currently logged into. Then we're going to type in SU to log in as the super user and enter PS4 as the password. And then we're also going to change the password on the super user account using the same command. And I'm just going to change the password on that one. So we're good. Okay, so now that the password's changed, one of the things we should do is also change the portage mirror, because it will be currently set to a different country than what you're in, because everybody watching this is probably watching this in different countries. So you want to change the portage mirror link to a link that's in your country, a server in your country, so that you get better speeds when downloading updates and stuff. So what we're going to do is do that first. So we're going to do nano and do it while you're still logged into the super user account. So we're going to do nano, then we're going to do /etc/portage. So portage /make.conf, and then open that up. So if you scroll down, you can see here Gentoo mirrors. So it's set to a server, not a server in the UK. I'm in the UK, so I want to switch this to a server in the UK. So what I'm going to do is open up the Brave web browser right here. And I'm going to be searching for Gentoo portage mirrors. So I'm going to search for that and agree to this. Gentoo source mirrors. So yeah, so as you can see, you've got different regions here. So if I go to Europe, I select the UK, and then I'll just grab one of these portage mirrors from the UK and put that in here. So I'll replace this one, right click and paste, so that I've swapped that out with a UK server, and then Control X to exit, Y for yes to save, and then enter. And of course this pops up at the most inconvenient time, so I need to go ahead and enter my my password for this. There we go. Okay, so yeah, anyway, press enter, and then that should save it. But yeah, so finally, just to show you guys, this is some footage I've recorded before a while ago on Gentoo Linux, just to show you running different games and stuff on there. So as you can see here, I'm actually able to run Halo the Master Chief Collection, which is obviously a game on Steam that you can run, which normally doesn't work, but it's running through Proton. If you enable Proton in the Steam settings, once you get logged in on Steam, because obviously there's different games you can run on Steam. Any games that have a native Linux version, then you'll be able to run no problem on Linux, like any OpenGL titles, especially older games like, you know, Half-Life and Portal and Left 4 Dead and all of those kind of games. Those will run fine. But obviously if you want to run a Windows game, then you're going to have to enable Proton in Steam in the Steam settings, which is kind of like a Windows wrapper that will allow you to run the game. So as you can see, running using Proton, I'm able to run Halo the Master Chief Collection. Also, you need to make sure you run the version that does not have the anti-cheat enabled, because anti-cheat can detect Proton and Wine and other Windows wrappers. So it won't let you actually, play properly. So make sure you disable the anti-cheat if you have that option. And then, as you can see, I'm able to run the game. I've also ran Doom, which is obviously a Vulkan title, so it runs pretty well. And then I've also been able to run, obviously, a bunch of other emulators and stuff, and also running Mario Kart 8 using the cemu emulator. Now, if you want to get details on how to get Proton working on Steam and Wine working and getting DirectX games to work on Linux, and how to get, the cemu emulator set up and installed so you can run Wii U games on the PS4. I already have videos covering that. I'll link them in the cards in the top right and in the description. They're part of my 5.05 jailbreak series, but it works the same. Gentoo is the same on 5.05 as it is on 6.72 once you have it up and running. So you can follow those videos to, get more out of Gentoo Linux, get Wii U games running, get more PC games running like DirectX titles as well. So yeah, all of that's covered in those videos. So if you want any more information, any more content on Gentoo Linux, it already exists out there. So yeah, that's pretty much everything. Obviously, people also want to know, how do I get back to the PS4 operating system once I'm in Gentoo? You just go over here, go to restart the computer, and that will, there we go, restart here. That will just shut down the system, reboot it, which will boot you back into the PS4's operating system. So as you can see here, it will just take a few seconds. The system will reboot and you'll be back in the PS4 OS. And then, of course, if you want to go back into Linux again, just load that same payload we loaded before with the drive plugged in that has Linux on it, and it should boot you into Linux. So yeah, I mean, that's basically it. That is how you boot into Gentoo Linux on the PS4, and you can run PC games and lots more emulators and use it as a desktop computer if you want. Totally up to you. Web browse, you've got all of that functionality now that you can access Linux on the PS4. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video or found the information useful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one.